I picked this mower up from a friend who lives about 2 hours from me. It's in extremely good condition, and it even came with the bag and the charging cable for the starting battery. I'm not really sure why it was given away, but I think he said it was stopping by itself when it got too hot and they'd have to wait for it to start again. I don't know if they're aware of it, but these mowers aren't supposed to do that, and that points to a bigger issue. In today's video, we look at this almost pristine Craftsman mower with a Briggs flathead on it. The problem is that I really don't know what's wrong with it other than what I was told, so we're going to have to find out for ourselves what it's doing and not doing. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. Now, this mower is very well equipped with rear-wheel drive, multiple cut settings, and even push-button starting, and by the condition it's in, I don't think they used it all that much. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. The first thing I want to do is to look it over by checking the fluids and then maybe try starting it. If you saw the shorts video on this mower, you'll know that it did run when I put some fuel into the carb, but I also mentioned that the tank was bone dry, but I may have to eat those words here in a minute. On closer inspection, yes, there is no standing fuel in the tank, but the visible part of the tank is damp, which means on this style of fuel tank, there's some fuel in it. It's just in a part that's not visible. I'm not going to add any fuel to the tank, and you'll see what's about to happen. I do believe there's enough fuel in the tank, but it's just in the lowest part of the tank. Remember, when checking the oil level, you need to wipe it clean first and then reinsert the dipstick to get an accurate reading. Otherwise, you run the risk of not having enough oil in the engine, which looks like the situation we have here. If the engine is ran with low oil, it could prematurely wear out the engine, or worse yet, cause the engine to overheat and then lock up when the piston gets stuck in the cylinder. I'm going to add a few ounces of oil to get it to the safe level, then try starting it, and remember that I have not added any extra fuel to the tank to show that there is enough fuel in it to start the engine, but you just can't see it. As you can see, it looks like there was enough fuel in the tank, even though it looked like it was empty. The strangest part was it should have kept running in the shorts video when I tried to start it, but I think I know what happened there. Now, there is something unusual going on, which is some white smoke coming out of the top cover. A few people mentioned it in the comment section on the shorts video, and I think I have an answer for that as well. I also want to try to start the engine when it's warm to make sure it's going to start, but there was a slight issue. Unfortunately, the engine did not start back up when it was warm, which is not a good situation. I checked the air vane flap and it looks like the choke is open just like it should be when the engine is warm. I also checked the choke flap to confirm, and sure enough, it was in the open position. Now, if you didn't know, a warm engine does not need the extra fuel from the carb when it's choked, but just for testing, I'm going to spray some fuel into the carb to see if it's a starvation issue. So something strange just happened. The engine restarted with the extra fuel, which would point to a starvation issue. Also, the engine stopped running on its own, which shouldn't have happened. I want to pour several ounces of fuel into the tank so we can try another test start, just in case we used what little fuel was left in the tank. As you can see, there's no standing fuel at the bottom of the tank, and that's because of the way this tank is designed, which is not like a standard fuel tank. I'll show you more of this tank in a bit, but for right now, I'm going to try and restart the engine. And if it doesn't start, we'll have to put it on the table for an inspection. Unfortunately, it didn't start on its own, so I'm going to have to help it out again and see if it will start with some fuel in the carb's throat. So it looks like we have some fuel issues we need to take care of, and we also want to take a look at the top of the engine and see if there's a reason for that smoke. I hate to say it, but even after I fix this mower, it still smokes, but I don't think it's anything too serious, as you'll see here in a bit. The first thing I want to do is to remove the bowl nut, which on this carb is also the fuel jet, and make sure it's clear. I'm not going to remove the carb just yet. Instead, I'm going to remove the bowl first and see what it looks like. Then I'll decide if we need to remove the entire thing for more work. After removing the fuel line from the carb, there's still quite a bit of fuel in the tank, even though it's not visible from the opening. Now, after most of the fuel has been drained, I'll then carefully lean the tank back so it's out of the way. Once we take a look at what came out of the tank, there is a nasty surprise waiting for us. What we're seeing at the bottom of the cup is a glob of water, which is not a good sign. That means there might be more of it inside the carb, which we'll have to get out. I'm going to clean the bottom of the bowl so we don't get too much dirt in our fuel when we try and drain out the fuel. Now, because of the way the bowl is shaped and because the bowl nut is very shallow, you can't remove it with a wrench, so you're definitely going to need to use a socket instead. I want to be very careful because I want to try and capture as much of the fuel as possible to see if there's anything wrong with it. Now, our first look at the fuel that came out of the carb looks to be just fine. Now, it does have some color to it, but it's not enough to worry about. However, if you look at what's left in the bowl itself, it tells a very different story. What you're looking at is even more water in the fuel. I know it's hard to tell because there's not a lot of fuel around it, so seeing its edges is kind of hard. So to make it easier, we'll pour it into the cup, which should really make it stand out. Now, it should be easier to see after pouring it into this cup. The water is more than likely the reason why we couldn't get this mower to start up again, because once it made its way to the carb, it stopped the fuel from getting to the engine. It was strange, though, that I could get it to run again once I manually primed it with fuel from my bottle. Since we pretty much figured out why it didn't want to start back up, next I'm going to look for a reason why the engine is smoking. Now, the smoke doesn't have to happen at the top of the engine, it's just leaving through there, but I do want to see if there's any fresh oil here as well. There's quite a bit of grass clippings inside the starter cup, which is pretty normal, so I'm going to get rid of that using a vacuum. Now, this isn't necessary, but if it fills up with too much grass, it could interfere with how the recoil works. Unfortunately, this is not the source of the smoke, so we'll keep looking. So there's quite a bit of dirt collected around the emissions hose and the valve spring area, so more than likely there's a small leak in this area that could be allowing some oil to make it to the muffler. I'm going to clean this area and then come back to it after using it a few times and see if the dirt comes back. While I'm here, I'm also going to lube this area up so it continues to work well this next season. Now, this part is not necessary, but lubricating the cable is important because it's the most likely thing to seize up. Now that I've taken a look around and cleaned up the areas I want to look at later on, I'm going to replace the recoil and the top cover. I was really expecting to see some fresh oil, but it makes sense that any fresh oil would be covered in dirt. So here's the reason why you don't see the fuel at the bottom of the tank. The lowest part of the tank is in the back, and it's also very narrow. This design helps to get all the fuel from the tank, but it doesn't allow you to see if the tank is really empty. The next thing I want to do is to make sure the jet is clear. Now, more than likely the jet is already cleared, but I need to make sure it's completely cleared of any sort of buildup. After that's done, I'll then start to reassemble the carb. Now, when tightening the bolt, don't over tighten it, otherwise you could damage it. If that happens, there aren't many options other than getting a new carb. While the parts were off the mower, I took this opportunity to clean the dirt off of them, but it's not necessary to do that. If I had taken the carb off the engine, I would have cleaned it as well. Now, here's a better look at how the choke system works. The choke is closed when the engine is off and cold, but once it's on, the air from the flywheel will open the choke. Once the engine is hot, the thermostat next to the muffler will keep the choke from closing. Also, when replacing the air filter base, make sure the breather hose gets connected to this port on the back of the base. If it doesn't, the engine could breathe in unfiltered air, which will cause the engine to wear out prematurely. Since I've misplaced the air filter from when I did the shorts video, I'm going to replace it with a new one. Now, these filters are around $5 online, but if you buy more than one, the price for each will drop. If you need one of these filters, there should be a link in the description. Before I put this mower back on the ground, I'm going to service the wheels because they don't spin as smoothly as I want them to. Now this might sound trivial to you, and you're absolutely right, but making the wheels easier to spin means the mower will be easier to use. First, I'm going to clean the axles and then put some lithium grease on it. It is interesting that the rear wheels are all plastic. There isn't a steel sleeve in here. I hate to say it, but this will eventually wear out without any lube on it. You don't need to use lithium grease. Use whatever you have lying around because some lube is better than no lube. While I'm here, I'm also going to lubricate the pivots for the height adjusters. Once the wheel is back on, I'll give it a test spin and you'll see that it spins a lot better than before. If your wheels spin freely and there's no binding, then the least I would do is spray some WD-40 around the nut and behind the wheel, and more than likely some of it will eventually make it to the axle. If you really want them to last, then clean all the rust off the axle and the metal sleeve if your wheel has one, and then lube it. You don't have to do this very often, probably once a year, but doing this will make the mower a lot easier to use. Now the front wheels are a bit different because it is self-propelled, but the same principles still apply. It's nice to see that at least the front wheels have a steel sleeve in them to keep them from wearing out. Also, the plastic teeth for the drive system is in almost perfect condition, which goes to show you just how little this mower was actually used. After spraying anything that moves or rotates with some sort of lube, I'll then replace the wheel, and then we'll do the same procedure for the rest of the wheels. Now, it's very humid and about 85 degrees Fahrenheit right now, and the engine is still very warm from our testing from earlier, so I'm going to drain the oil and fill it with fresh oil. Someone made a comment about why I didn't use the drain plug, and the answer is very simple. First, it's my choice to drain it that way, and second, I find it a lot easier doing it this way. If you want to use the drain plug, be my guest, but I'll stick with this method until I find a reason to change. While the mower is on its side, I'm going to remove the blade and sharpen it. If yours is very worn out, I would consider replacing it, but if it's still good and you don't have the equipment to sharpen it, take it to someone who can do it for you. Now once the blade is back on the mower, I'll spray the back side of the bushings for the drive axles, put it back on its wheels, and then put the correct amount of oil in it. Now be sure to take your time and make sure you don't overfill your engine oil, or you could damage the engine when it's running. Now when checking the oil, remember to wipe the dipstick each and every time before you stick it back into the engine. Unfortunately, our first fill didn't get it to the correct level, so I'm going to have to add some more and then check it again. This time it looks like the oil is right at the top mark, which means it's full. If yours is over this mark, try dumping a few ounces back out, and of course add more back in if you poured out too much. So I'm going to put in about 8 ounces of 100% gasoline with no ethanol into the tank, and I'm going to show you what the bottom of the tank looks like after pouring it in and how it looks like there's still nothing in it. As you can see, the bottom only looks wet with fuel, but there is no standing fuel visible. Now if I poured in another 8 ounces, it would definitely look like there's fuel in the tank, and this is more than enough to start the engine, so let's get ready for a test start. So it's been running for about 3 minutes, and on a hot day like today, the engine should be hot enough to activate the bypass. If we take a look at the air vane, you can see that it's in the most forward position, which means the choke is indeed bypassed by the thermostat. Now we just need to see if it'll start back up. So it looks like everything is working just like it's supposed to, and aside from looking into where that oil leak is at, this should be an excellent mower. I feel bad putting this mower back to work after 9 years of hardly any use, but it's going to be doing what it's designed to do. Now if you're curious where the battery is located at, it's at the back of the mower where the bag goes, and to get to it you just need to remove 3 screws. Now I don't have any plans on replacing the battery, and there are 2 good reasons why. The first is the battery is very expensive, so I'd have to add that to the price of the mower. The second is most people really don't want it. Now, if this was my personal mower, I would replace the battery, but I would use a power tool battery that I already use. That way I don't have to buy a $30 battery just for the mower. Another reason why this mower would shut off while mowing is an ignition coil that works while cold but fails when it gets hot. If that's the case, remove the top cover, then the recoil, and then replace the ignition coil. So in the end, it turns out the mower just had some water in the tiny amount of gasoline it had at the bottom of the tank and in the carb. After getting rid of it and adding fresh fuel, it's back to working just like it should. Hopefully whoever ends up with this mower will take the proper steps for storage during the winter so it'll start back up in the spring. So my question is, would you buy the expensive battery for the push button start or just leave it alone? Like I said earlier, I would get it working again, but I wouldn't buy a new battery for it. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.